8 years of love lessons from Shannon and Max.
Welcome.
Max is nervous.
I'm not a big fan of talking about relationships.
It was my idea to do this video. 8 years of love lessons. We've been together for 8 years.
A bit over 8 years.
And this is what we've learned, not what we think you should do in your relationship. So this is way more of a personal.
And even before that, it's like, you don't need to have a relationship. My first recommendation is...
This is Max's first lesson. Lesson number 1.
Lesson number 1. Only choose a relationship if you really want a relationship. If you're sort of thinking about it, or you think it's a good idea, or like you feel some sort of lack in your own life, a relationship is not going to fill that up. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to give you what you're actually looking for.
I ask Max all the time if he still wants to be in this relationship. You don't ask me that very much, though.
Only when it gets to an extreme point, when she's like really pissed, and I'm like, do you want to get a divorce, honey? And this was a tip from Gary Douglas.
Maybe he's asked me that once.
A few times.
Well, my question about do you want to be in the relationship, it's not the threat you're turning it into. It's actually a question of curiosity. Like, do you still want to be in this relationship? I'm actually always curious because I don't assume that just because we were in a relationship yesterday, we should be in the same relationship today.
Which is a creative point of view. And like, I've wanted to have a fixed point of view about the relationship and what it is and define it and so forth. Like, that's what I learned and that's what I've looked for. And
Max is German. He just sounds Australian.
It's true. It's true. But being with Shannon has been a real gift in the sense of like, there is no conclusion basically in the relationship about what it is and the definition and so forth. You have to be creative in every 10 seconds. And that's been and continues to be like a great gift for me.
I would say like the number one thing to start with this is to recognize that like no relationship is the same. So like the stuff that we've learned and what works for us won't necessarily work for like everybody. Although I do think there's some like basic overarching things about relationship, like honoring the other person and honoring yourself in the relationship that probably matter in every relationship. But yeah. I think my point is like, don't compare your relationship in reality to like other relationships, which is so easy to do. Because,
unless
like,
you want to kill your relationship.
So one of the things I say is that like relationships are like a secret society that you'll never be a part of. Like literally what goes on between two people, you will absolutely never be really included in or part of or know. And every single relationship and every interaction between two people is completely unique based on the combination of those two people. So every relationship is different. And that's a huge lesson that I actually learned was that I remember in the beginning, I used to compare how I felt and like what was going on in this relationship. I used to literally think in my head, is it supposed to be like this? And I thought that was a valid question. But then over time, I realized that what that question was doing was I was actually looking for a comparison for a relationship as though there was some thesis about relationship that my relationship should match, and there isn't. There is not a right way to do relationship. There's just the way that works for you and the other person, literally. So yeah, that was a big lesson for me, like not to compare our relationship to other relationships and just to really focus on like what actually makes us happy was the most productive.
Like what actually works for us.
Yeah,
because it's going to be very different. My number 2 is, learned this in the first few years of being together, is being aware of other people's projections and expectations, rejections, separations, and judgments of your relationship.
Ooh.
And especially with Shannon being Gary Douglas's, who's the founder of Access Consciousness, his daughter.
People watching this might not even know about Access.
Well, there'll be a link below for Access Consciousness anyways.
There you go. There you go.
So she was very well known within Access, and every time we'd go to a class or something, like we would have a lot of trouble in our relationship and we'd be fighting and we'd be sort of like, Murr. And after several times and sort of being in the question going like, what is this? We started recognizing that it was other people's projections of us and the relationship and what it should be and what it is. And like all those things that Shannon was talking about, like when somebody else looks at your relationship, everything that they basically put onto it, which has no real foundation in reality and what it actually is. So we had to look at what this relationship is for us, not from a conclusion, not like fixate on this is what it is and define it, but to recognize that other people will put their point of view on our relationship, and that doesn't actually matter for us. Like, we would basically just have to use the tools and like clear that, okay, all of those projections and expectations, destroy and uncreate those, and then be in the question of our relationship and what we're creating, what we'd like to create, what's possible.
Yeah, that was a huge eye opener for me, realizing how many people had so many projections and judgments of our relationship and of us. And sometimes they were like positive projections, like they're perfect, I want what they have. And then a lot of times they were like really negative projections, like, you know, not nice stuff.
Something else I realized about other people's projections and expectations was it actually didn't have anything to do with our relationship. A lot of the times they would actually be judging themselves in regards to our relationship, which had nothing to do with us. It was just literally a judgment that they were inventing. It wasn't real.
Yeah, so that was a huge lesson and I would say we still have to be very aware of that, in that being really aware of other people's projections towards us about the relationship, because like whenever we go stay in Noosa, Australia, where Max and I met, and his children and ex-wife live, like being around her especially is just really like, she's just got so many points of view. That's her thing. But oh my gosh, it really affects and can affect the way I feel in the relationship, unless I acknowledge that it's a projection and expectation, which has been a massive help to actually be able to recognize that and not make it mine. One of the other things, really, I think, big things that I've learned that I'm probably in the process of learning this lesson, this love lesson, is that when you want to be right, or when you're being right in the relationship, that you're basically making the other person wrong. So in order for you to be right, like the other person has to be wrong, and just being right about something is such like against the other person. And that segues me to the other lesson that I've learned, is that you have to really work through things together, which is actually not something I realized was the deal, because, you know, when you like get into a relationship, you have no reference point for it. At least I didn't. I had no idea what it would take. And that if I'm being right about something, or you're being right about something.
I did that once.
He's only done it once. I've done it more than once.
Like these 8 years once.
Number one, you're making the other person wrong. And as soon as you're being right about something, you're no longer working with, you're right. And the other person literally has to be wrong because you're right. And that's not partnership. That's like rightness. And that
separation.
And separation, which leads to separation, which does not make you closer. I feel like this is obvious as I'm saying it, but it's so deeply systemic.
Pandemic.
It's a real pandemic in relationships about being right, and then the other person's wrong. And then like, as soon as the other person's wrong, it's like, why do you even want to be with somebody who's wrong? You know?
Or someone who's making you wrong.
Or someone who's making you wrong. And if you need to be right that much, you're not really being with the other person. You're just being right, you know?
And it's interesting too, because it's a thing, it's not like, okay, I'll never be right and I'll never be wrong again. It's like having more of a subtle awareness too, because I noticed like, I have made a commitment to go beyond judgment, which is right and wrong. And then I see it show up in the strangest ways. Again, I'm like, oh, it's that again. So you don't have to make yourself wrong when you discover that you're judging again. You just have to recognize, acknowledge, and go, okay, what choice would I actually like to make here? Something that I came to this relationship with, and my previous ones as well, is looking to fulfill something that I thought was lacking in me. So I was looking to the other person, I was looking to Shannon to be something that I wasn't willing to be, and so I would have something that I wasn't willing to have beforehand. So when I first met Shannon, I saw like she was very successful, like as a facilitator. She was making...
I'm even more successful now!
She was making good money, and now she's making even much, much better money.
I wasn't making shit compared to what I'm making now.
But for me at the time, like, I was really struggling financially. I was struggling in every area of my life, basically. So when I saw Shannon, she was traveling, and she was basically had this freedom about her. And it wasn't like the travel wasn't the freedom, but that was just like an element. She had a freedom in her universe of being herself and living the life that she desired that I wanted to have. And for quite some time after that, I made her the source of that. And I was always like basically looking to her and sort of trying to gain that from her, which absolutely didn't work. And it was destructive to our relationship. And I was lucky that we could still have the relationship and that it actually improved constantly because we were both willing to change and have something different. And for many years, I was looking to her of like the things that she'd created for herself that I wanted, but wasn't willing to have for myself. So really, for me, it's still continuing to dig deep in asking the questions of myself, what would I actually like? And what choices can I make to create that right away? Rather than making Shannon the source that could never fulfill what I wasn't willing to be and have and choose.
So this lesson, I will say that my dad actually tried to teach me before we got together. And I couldn't even learn this lesson.
That poor guy tried to teach us so many things at the beginning that we weren't willing to have.
I had no ability, I actually couldn't get it. And what he told me was, he was like, you don't just marry the person, you marry their whole family. I had no clue. I didn't have a fucking clue what he meant. Like when you say, I don't know if some of you guys out there listening might know what I mean, or some of you guys might also hear that and just be like, I have no idea what that means. But basically, my dad tried to teach me this, which I've then later learned on my own.
The hard way.
That I would say so, yes. That you don't just marry, like when you marry somebody, you're not just marrying them, like you're actually marrying their whole family. And of course, everybody's family's dynamic is different. And you can have a unique situation where you're marrying somebody who might not have any family or is estranged from their family, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, within relativity, when you marry somebody, you marry their whole family. And I did not get that at all. But I've since learned that being married to somebody really like puts you in much more direct contact with their family. And boy, you better hope that family likes you. Because man, that was like really huge for me. Like, because I really care for Max, and I didn't realize that meant that then I would also have to like take a rash of shit from his parents, but it did. And I did. And we worked through that. Like we definitely worked through it. And now it's sort of like, it is part of the relationship, but that was a really big lesson I had to learn. Like I was so naive. About what marrying somebody, when you really marry somebody and include all of them and commit to that person, you're committing to their whole family.
Yeah, because they come as a package deal,
Yeah.
the family and the person. Even if the person doesn't really see their family a lot or have much to do with their family, it's still all of that influence, and they're connected. They're connected to their family still.
Yeah. And even if, exactly right, if the person you're marrying isn't even really that involved with their family, the person you're marrying probably is still going to bring through a lot of the stuff that they bought from their family, created with their family, you know, all the familial points of view. So one way or another, even if you have nothing to do with the other person's family, you're still going to have a lot to do with the other person's family.
The thing that I thought was really funny, that was some years ago, we discovered was the worst combination was when Shannon's being her mother and I'm being my father. Oh. Those two do not get along.
Really?
And they are like, if they ever met each other in real life, they would be adversarial to a degree.
It's like, it would be like this catalytic explosion.
So when we recognize that when we're being those elements of our parents, like that is the worst. But when we're being ourselves,
we get along amazing.
It's incredible.
Yeah. We have a lot of compatibility when we're being ourselves. So that's another lesson. That was a massive lesson for me, was looking at like how much my reference point for being a spouse or a wife or a girlfriend or a woman was, I learned from my mom. And then I would act out my mom's stuff a lot in this relationship, and that didn't usually go well. So
and it was the worst when I was acting out my father's stuff.
so I had to really like ask myself a question. I'm like, okay, so like, who am I being right now? And so much of the time I was like being my mom, or I was being my birth father, or I was being, it was like, I was just being somebody, I wasn't being me. So that was a big lesson. The lesson of like learning how to be me and actually prioritizing me in my interactions in the relationship has made a massive difference.
And for me, that required a huge amount of vulnerability, because there was so much rightness in like my father does a lot of rightness, and I tried to do a lot of that, and sometimes I still do. So for me to go beyond that rightness and go, wow, okay, I'm totally being someone else, took like a lot of vulnerability to acknowledge that. And then it could actually change. We actually laughed about it. Like I had to bring this up. Like we were so pissed at each other at the time. And I was like, what I just realized is like the worst combination is your mum and my dad. Like they do not get along. And we just had to laugh about it for minutes. And it really changed the whole thing. The last thing I wanted to mention is something that I've been doing again for the last 2 weeks. And I've noticed periodically as I've chosen it during the relationship has worked absolute wonders. And this is a tool from Gary Douglas, the founder of Access Consciousness, is to destroy and uncreate your relationship every single day. And it sounds something that's like too simple to actually have an impact. But 2 weeks ago when I started this again every day, like we were having a little bit of a difficult time. We were sort of like arguing during the day, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this again. And then literally from that time, we didn't anymore. Because I've noticed in my universe, like when I wake up in the morning, it's like I have the memory of yesterday and the day before and the week before of like the relationship. And I start creating the relationship from that point of view, where I take all of this other stuff and like my baggage and what I haven't been happy about or blah, whatever. And then I start creating that day again with all of that. But in the morning when I wake up, the last 2 weeks I've literally been destroying and creating the relationship, and many other relationships too, like with my children, with my family, with other people that I care about in my life. Been destroying and creating those relationships because it takes away all of the points of views and emotions and thoughts and stuff that have built up, and allows me to create those relationships like brand new every single day.
Yeah, like being present rather than in the past or in a projection.
Yeah. And we literally haven't fought the last 2 weeks since I've started to do that. And that was just me making that different choice. So destroying and creating relationships every single day can be an incredible creative gift.
Yeah, because that's a huge lesson in relationship, is how much you hold on to stuff from the past and then project it into the future. And like, is that creating the relationship, or is that like subjecting the relationship to a whole bunch of points of view?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other lessons, I think my final lesson, is that relationships are really fucking hard.
Yeah, you really have to want to create the relationship if you're going to be in it. Otherwise, it's just going to be shit. There's
so much work. What does my dad say? The relationships are like the 24/7 job you can never go home from.
Yeah.
Like, and which it's like, so like I've always questioned, I'm like, okay, so based on the amount of work, like, is this relationship worth it to me? Like I've asked that a lot of myself, and I'm really grateful that I've asked that of myself, because it really has got me to look at that, like, yeah, this is actually worth it to me. And I needed to know that for myself. Otherwise, I really wouldn't be consciously choosing the relationship. I'd always just sort of be like in reaction, and then like get shot out somewhere down the road and wonder how the fuck we got there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's definitely like, is this like the relationships or work? Which I feel like is like a naughty thing to say about relationships. But I think, like, it's taking the fantasy way out of it.
Totally. But I think that's a lot too, because people want this particular fantasy of a relationship rather than the reality. And because if you acknowledge what is, like if you go like, fuck, this relationship isn't working for me, it's not the only other choice is to break up necessarily. That's one choice. But then what that can bring you to is recognizing what's not actually working. And then there's a million choices of what could change if it's actually possible in a relationship. Because breaking up might totally be the right choice, or saying something to your partner, being vulnerable and creating something in that way. There's a million different possibilities. But if you don't acknowledge what is, you can't really change it.
Yeah, because I would even say that like this, I would say that aspects of this relationship have worked out like better for me than I ever could have fantasized was even possible. Like I had no idea that So thank you.
Thank you. So many of my fantasies were like of how I saw my parents, and it wasn't even cognitive, how my parents created their relationship. And I thought, oh, that's where this is heading.
Who actually ended up hating each other and getting a divorce in the end.
Yeah, exactly. And which totally didn't work. And then I was trying to create that, and that didn't work. So thanks to Shannon, hugely, because she wasn't allowing of my conclusions and fantasies and so forth. Like it really forced me to create.
I don't do well when people project onto me.
No.
I'm like, objection!
Yeah, so these are the things that we've learned in the last 8 years, and I'm sure there's more for us to learn and to be and to discover and to choose and create. And that's gotten us to this point now, and what can we create now, basically?
Yeah.
What's possible now?
And it's important for us in this video to talk about like the lessons that we've learned rather than to tell you what we think is like the right thing to do in a relationship, because there's so much of that out in the world. And I'm not sure if that always works very well, but I think for me, it's a much more powerful to let you in on the lessons that we've learned.
Yeah. And what would it take for more people to also like reveal things from their relationships more so that give people like a realistic perspective rather than some projection or fantasy? Because that can create more for all of us. Like some of our friends that have been vulnerable with us and like shared things about their relationships, I was like, wow, has been like such a gift because they have such a different reality. And like that openness and the joy that they have in their relationship from creating in that way has been a super gift for me personally.